You're listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Ding.
Welcome back to another episode of Reach, Teach, Talk. We are entering into season 3 of Reach, Teach, Talk, and I'm really excited because for our first guest of this new season, we have an expert on boys development, not just any expert. Michael G. Thompson, Dr. Thompson, has spent the past 31 years working at Belmont Hill School in Belmont, Massachusetts, an all-boys school as their psychologist, and he is also a internationally renowned writer and speaker and psychologist and consultant for school communities, parents, students, educators all around the world. Dr. Thompson has been featured on Good Morning America and 60 Minutes, the Today Show, the Oprah Winfrey Show. He has been called to be the expert speaker on so many different topics that relate to boys and boys' healthy development. He's the author of several books about healthy boys development. The one that really stands out to me most, frankly, and was most impactful for me as an educator was and still is Raising Cain, which came out in 1990. I want to say 1997. It was 99. It was 4 days.
Yeah.
Yep. We may talk about the significant event that happened just around that time, serendipity and coincidence and all of that notwithstanding. Raising Cain, for any of you who are parents or teachers of boys, this book has traction and is as relevant today as it was back when it came out. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Thompson here to talk with us today about boys and about raising flourishing boys and what that means. What does that mean to have a son or a student who is truly flourishing as a boy in modern society today? And this is very personal to me for several reasons. One is I attended an all-boys middle school, also in the Boston area a long time ago now. I was the middle school director at the Archer School for Girls. I've had the experience of being in an all-girls school as an educator in my adult years. And we're also entered into a period of time that the pandemic, I would argue, the pandemic has really shown a spotlight on, which is what we're doing as a society to help boys flourish and what we're not doing anymore. A lot of previously relied upon organizations and communities for boys have either shuttered or have gone co-ed, all for valid reasons and certainly understandable. Yet, are we losing something by the closure of, for example, the Boy Scouts and the co-edifying of the boys, what have been founded as a haven for boys' growth? Boys' schools in the country and around the world, in certain areas they continue to thrive. In certain other areas, they're showing a decrease in population. And why is that? And I think transcending those examples is really a question of how do we talk about the needs for boys without sounding like we're hearkening back to a pro-patriarchal philosophy or lens in this age where we know better, and we've been working so hard as a society and Western society and global society to lift women and girls' education, women in the workplace. But how do we also acknowledge the fact that there's an uptick in mental health issues for boys, for young men in society, certainly exacerbated due to the pandemic. When I was working at the Archer School for Girls during the COVID year, I would ask the girls, I'd say, hey, I know a lot about you right now, and you're doing okay, you're hanging in during this horrible period of time. How about your brothers? I know you have a brother. What's your brother up to these days? And without a doubt, hands down, 9 times out of 10, the girl would respond to me and say, kind of with an eye roll, I don't know anything about my brother's doing. He's upstairs in his bedroom doing whatever, video games, whatever. I don't know. I.e., he is disengaged. He is not coming down to communicate. He is isolating and isolated. And that was just 3 short years ago. And while it's really healthy for us, I think, to move forward from a trauma and a real tragedy like the global pandemic was for us, all of us, it's also important to dip back and to learn from moments like this and experiences like this, and so we can do better, and we can do better. And in this case, and again, the theme of this podcast today is on boys flourishing and how can we take lessons, recently learned and also age-old lessons about how boys can thrive, particularly in schools. So, with all that said, Dr. Thompson, it is thrilling to have you here.
Call me Michael, Nat. Thank you very much for having me.
I will call you Michael. Thank you for taking the flight yesterday from Boston to LAX, BOS to LAX. Thank you, JetBlue, for providing a nice experience for Dr. Thompson, for Michael. And I'm just excited to have a conversation with you and to really look to you and your expertise, working with boys and working in schools and working to help boys feel a sense of stability in a world that arguably, and maybe not too arguably, is rather unstable.
What you and I know is that boys do thrive in any good school. They thrive in co-ed schools. But there's something special that happens for boys when they are together in a group, when they have young men as their role models. I see it at summer camps for boys. You experienced it at summer camps for boys, right?
Yes.
Lifelong experiences. And both you and I know that it has a particular impact in the middle school years.
Why is that? Can you define the middle school years and explain to our audience what is it about their development at that time, or is it more the social dynamics, like girls are a year ahead of boys at that age, or and it may make them feel held back?
Well, it has to do with there are two things. If I distill down all of the research on gender differences, there are two things that really matter in school, which is by school age, 3/4 of the boys in the class are more physically active than any girl. So while the human brain, the female brain and the male brain are 90% overlapping, when you send them into school, when it comes to physicality, they're only 1/4 overlapping, which means that the classroom environment, which puts a premium on sitting and listening, is simply more difficult for boys. The average boy is more physically active and more restless. And the arc of development of girls is different from boys. It's like, duh, haven't you noticed? But the two biggest differences are at the beginning of elementary, pre-K and K, where you get very kind of organized girls who are on top of things, and you get completely spacey boys who are always pig-piling and wrestling with each other, right?
How very dare they?
And then at 6th grade, when girls start to mature physically, they hit puberty earlier, but many girls in 6th or 7th grade are in some ways complete. I mean, when a girl gets her first period, she's topped out in height. Boys will continue to grow in college.
Yes.
And the idea that we can't acknowledge or can't accommodate to these two different arcs of development. So I talk to 9th grade English teachers, and I say, tell me about the girls in your class and the boys in your class. And what they describe is they have 9th grade girls, many of whom are abstract thinkers, very much on top of their work. And they've still got boys who are still more concrete thinkers, still disorganized, still need a lot more scaffolding. Because let's be honest, a 9th grade boy is more like an 8th grade boy, and a 9th grade girl is more like a 10th grade girl.
So it's actually a 2-year gap in the same grade level.
That's the way it feels. And that makes for boys feeling humiliated, and it makes for them banding together and sometimes just being obnoxious as a way to fight back against the institutions. That can be overcome, and it can be brilliantly overcome by a teacher who really likes boys, who conveys that she likes them, that he conveys that he likes them. It doesn't have to be a man. It can be a woman, but she has to convey that she likes them. She has to convey that she's not scared of them, and she has to know how to use a sense of humor with them and structure them and challenge them. So I'm always teaching teachers that constantly scolding boys, always talking to them too much, it's lost on them. They've been tuning out their mothers since they were little. Right?
Yep. They built that skill.
And so repeating the same thing over and over is not what I started out as a middle school teacher. And I do middle school assemblies. I was in Dallas at a school doing a middle school assembly with 300 or 400 kids. And in an assembly hall, I take a hand mic and I walk around. Yep. And so that I'm behind them, I'm beside them, I'm constantly moving. They have to keep their eye on me.
Yep.
They don't know where the hell I'm going to be.
Yep.
And that works for middle schoolers.
Absolutely.
Sitting in front and saying, now be quiet, does not work.
Yep.
But given the physical difference, the difference in physicality between boys and girls, it is important that we think about how boys best learn.
Yes. So before we get to that question, how do boys best learn? Because that'll get into the whole kind of the neuroscience and the cognition. I'm fascinated by, you brought up 5 different points to consider about when teaching boys in terms of their behavior in the classroom and in terms of engaging them and keeping them proactive. And as you're speaking about those 5 different points, I was reflecting on my role when I was a principal at a school, an elementary school here in Los Angeles, where honestly, Michael, like 90% of my discipline cases were boys.
Of course.
And they would be brought in by hand by their teacher. Basically, fix him, Nat.
Yes.
Fix this boy. He is squirrely. He is rude. He is being belligerent. And they'd come in, and I'm not mocking the teacher at all. This is, it's spending 90% of your time on one student, right?
Yeah, it's annoying.
It's annoying. On 5% of your class is annoying. But they would come in with their arms crossed in a very defensive posture. This is the adult, and say, fix it. And let's talk it out. Talk. And all of that was always struck me in the back of my mind is like, hey, why is it the boy who's being pulled out? Is it because he's louder? Is it because he's taller? Because, he's squirrelier? He's just more visible this way. And also this idea of just fix it through talking doesn't always work either. Like, and that relates to one of your 5 points about how you communicate with boys. And it's not just sitting across the table and talking, asking questions and repeating yourself, right? It's something else. And this idea of where boys need to sense that you like them.
Yes.
Can I replace the word like with trust or believe in, or is it a combination of both? I like trust and I like and believe, but I'm going to elaborate.
Yeah. That you trust boy development, that you actually think boys are going to turn out okay.
Sounds like there's hope in there.
Well, the problem is we live in the most violent society, first world society. And most crime, most aggression is done by young men. Mm-hmm. And it gives us a feeling that boys can turn out badly. There's always the fear that boys could turn out badly. Mm-hmm. And there are many elementary school teachers that I run into are constantly interfering with boys' play because they think they're doing violence prevention, future violence prevention. And I talked to a second grade teacher once, way back during the Iraq War, and I said, you don't let boys write about warfare or anything involving guns. In my mind, I'm thinking that there's no scientific relationship between writing about warfare and actually going to war. And I said, why don't you do it? And she said, I don't want one of my second graders to grow up and become a politician who starts a war. And I think, wow, that's politicizing second grade. And
they're 7 years old, by the way, second grade.
Right. But it was in all sincerity on her part. She thought she was doing the right thing to raise peaceful citizens. Yes. But what I know really works is giving boys a chance to play together, run their own games, have conflict, resolve conflict, have more conflict, resolve conflict. So I had a mother, this is my maybe most asked question on the parenting circuit, because moms particularly come at me with this question. They say, Dr. Thompson, I have 2 boys, 4.5 and 6, and they just wrestle and fight and they're competing all the time. And I say, and how do you handle it? And she said, well, I always talk to them about how to resolve conflict peacefully. And I say, really? How's that working out? And she said, well, it's not working out very well. And so that's why I'm asking the question. And I said to her, are they more or less matched in weight? I know that the 6-year-old's probably taller, but are they more or less matched in weight? Yeah, pretty equally in weight. Yes. Does the 4.5-year-old start stuff with his older brother? Yes. Have you had any broken teeth or stitches or blood? Well, crying, I say, of course. But any broken teeth or broken bones or no. And I say, then when they start to compete or fight, I want you to smile and leave the room. Because I want them to know you're not going to rescue them. Yes. You're not going to be Judge Judy, that they have to find a way to work it out.
Yes.
And no one trusts boys to work it out. They think, oh my God, it'll get worse and worse and worse and worse. So when you say trust in boys, I so resonate with that. I was at a school, on one of those rooftop private schools in New York, watching 2 4.5-year-old boys play, a more husky boy and a thinner boy. One was in the soccer net, and the other was kicking, and then they would trade places. But every once in a while, they'd just start wrestling. And a teacher was over immediately. And when she did it the 3rd time, I said, are you assigned to watch these boys? Oh, she said, ever since the incident.
Ooh, the incident.
And I said, what was the incident? And she said, we see the huskier boy. He sat on the slider boy's chest and sat so long on his chest. She didn't have to tell me about this. My older brother did this to me.
Yep.
And she sat, he sat on his chest, and the boy on the bottom got enraged. And at one point he came up real rapidly and bit his friend in the face. And the mother of the bitten boy wanted the school to forbid the boys to play together. They were the best of friends. And yet they had to assign a teacher because no one believed the 2 4.5-year-old boys could actually learn something. And the lesson is simple. Don't sit on your friend's chest.
Because that friend might respond in a way that you lose your nose.
Right. But the idea that boys can't learn from that.
Right.
There's an assumption that girls can learn from experience, but boys are monkey see, monkey do. That they can't, that their impulsivity will always rule the day. So in my book, It's a Boy, which starts with the birth of a boy, I tell a mother, if she's in despair when she walks into her son's room and it's a mess and he hasn't picked anything up and he's not focused and I want her to get a picture of her father whom she loved, her grandfather whom she loved. Her older brother is now a wonderful uncle. Get a framed picture of that man, put it on the wall of your son's room, and remember that your grandfather or your brother was probably a boy just like this. And that's my concrete way of saying trust in boy development.
That is such a great, simple, visual lesson right there, that we were all kids once. Mm-hmm. And for those of us who are male, biologically male, we were boys once. And we tend to forget that,
right.
And especially when it comes to our own children, we want to rescue them. This idea of rescuing them is so fascinating to me. And I'm thinking about 2 words, rescue, and I'm actually thinking about the word reflect. And the reason why is because what you were just sharing about, trusting boys to develop their own conflict resolution, to actually learn the lesson that you're teaching them, even if that learning is not visible immediately, that boys do reflect on lessons and on examples in front of them that relate to ethics and relate to choices, right? And it reminds me of a time I was talking to a head of school, and this head just out of the blue said, well, we know that boys don't have the capacity for self-reflection. They don't have a very much of an emotional life. And
that's rubbish.
Well, that was my thought bubble, but I was trying to get a consulting gig with a school, so I didn't say that. But I thought that, of course. And the reason why I immediately went back to Camp Beckett, where I was a counselor and a camper, overnight camp out in the Berkshires. And every night we would have what was called cabin chat. And cabin chat is there's 8 boys in a cabin and 2 counselors, a counselor in training. And the counselor would come in with a candle in the middle of the cabin.
I've sat in Beckett cabin. I've written about him in my book Homesick and Happy.
You're kidding me, really?
Oh no! I've been to Beckett. I know about Beckett.
Yes, in this tradition. Then you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
You can't tell me after experiencing one night of cabin chat that boys don't have the capacity for an emotional life, but also reflection, because all that they're doing is they're listening to each other. They can't see each other. All you have is a candlelight in the middle of the cabin. You see the glimmer of their eyes, maybe, but nothing else about the boys. You're forced to listen, to really listen, not just hear. And you have one chance in cabin chat to share a highlight of the day or a challenge of the day, to answer maybe a question there's no right or wrong answer. It's a
So let me bump it up. My counselor, June Schmunk, and I at Belmont Hill for 15 years ran a group called the Family Group. And the Family Group was a euphemism for your family's gone to hell, your parents are divorced, your father is having an affair, your mother's on drugs. And I mean, your family's a mess is what it was.
Family.
And we always had 8 to 12 boys. And when we started out with this group, I thought we're going to have to time limit it. They won't make a long-term commitment. And June, my counselor, who'd worked at a co-ed school in Boston, said, well, I think we just have to have it occasional because the intensity, they won't want the intensity. And we were both wrong. The boys wanted it every week, and they wanted it as intense as been running for years. And boys become emotional leaders. And the moment one more senior boy, it helps if he's an athlete, opens up about the wreck in his family, all the boys think, well, if he can do it, if he can take that risk. Boys model emotional courage for each other, but they don't all talk in paragraphs. Boys don't talk. I've run groups in co-ed high schools. With counselors, without, I've run them. And girls talk more. And they tend to dominate the groups, and they become the experts on what's emotional and on insight, and the girls will totally take it over, and the boys start to withdraw.
Yes.
When you have an all-boys group, your emotional leaders become the boys, and the other boys follow them, and they aspire to one day, I mean, if they're a 9th or 10th grade boy, they aspire one day to be the kind of emotional leader who can manifest the courage to tackle these really difficult family problems. And we tackle really difficult, I shouldn't say they tackle really difficult problems. But they don't always talk at great length. They often shorten. And I remember one boy describing he was following his father's affair on the father's phone and keeping the secret from his mother and stuff like that. And he laid this out on day one in the group. And the group leader looked at him and said, "You win." And everybody laughed. He didn't, as a psychologist, I would have said, that sounds so hard. That must have been very hard for you.
Right.
But the boy leader said, "You win," and everybody got it. That was a really crap situation. So glad you're here in this group. You're safe with us. We'll look after you.
You're not going to be exiled for this. You are not. You should not feel shame about this, about sharing this with us, about what you're experiencing. There's so much. The empathy in those two words, "You win," it's just unbelievable, and the laughter that happened as a result, because it's a laughter of like, there's no arguing. You win. Like that is.
And that
pretty
was
much
perfectly empathic.
Totally empathic.
But very boy style.
Yes, totally. It reminds me of on a lighter example, but similar is at Reach Academy for Young Men, which is a summer institute for boys, middle school and high school boys in LA. We have to walk for 15 minutes to the park, to the nearby park, to be able to get the let out, play soccer, and do physical wellness. And anyhow, so at the end of the first day, we have our cabin chat equivalent, which is called Common Ground. It's like a closing circle. And every boy knows that at the end of the day, at Common Ground, he can be heard. And the first day, one of the boys said, there's one complaint I have, which is that walk down to Roxbury Park, just 15 minutes takes a long. It just feels like a long time. And without missing a beat, the boy next to him elbows him, and he goes, "Walk faster." And everybody laughed, right? And that was it. And the kid shut up, and he was like, "Okay." And then that's how we go, right? It's bracing. I just think so. But getting back to this, you're landing on a topic that I brought up at the very beginning, which I'd like to return to, which is the idea of all boys spaces, all male spaces, and the importance of them. What you're citing examples as to their importance. Where do we find them today? And where can parents and anybody out here listening to this podcast episode, where can they go to find a place where their sons can be in a fraternity, a literal fraternity, to benefit from these examples that you're sharing?
There are opportunities in all schools, and the vast majority of schools, of course, are co-ed. But there is a problem, which when a co-ed school does something just for boys, it feels to many teachers like they're supporting the patriarchy, that they're favoring boys. And we still live in a patriarchal society at the adult level. But in schools, where girls have enjoyed so much more success than boys in the past few decades, so that I can just reel off a couple of statistics. 2/3 of the valedictorians in the United States are girls. 59% of college graduates and only 40% of young men are college graduates. 2/3 of the expulsions and suspensions in schools land on boys, particularly boys of color. And so when I talk to committed feminists and they celebrate the strides that girls have made, girls pulled even with boys in the National Assessment of Educational Progress in the United States. They pulled even in 1982. They started passing them in math in 2002. There are now more girls taking pre-calc and calculus in the United States and going on to college. And when I talk to women who are happy about that and I say we've got to do something for boys, they often react as if that's going to take something away from girls. And it's this zero-sum mentality, which is a barrier. So when I recently suggested to a Catholic school that was having no problem in attracting girls, but was having a problem attracting boys, and they asked for suggestions, and I said, yes, you have to do some off-campus trips. Take them out to Camp Beckett,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
off-season.
Yes.
And send them with the young male teachers. Because I was once at the Crescent School for Boys in Toronto in mid-January, and there was a line of duffel bags down the hall. And I said to the person who was showing me around, so what are the duffel bags? Oh, well, our winter camping trip. I said, you have a winter camping trip? I said, who takes them? And they said, the teachers. And I said, well, that makes for an interesting job interview. Are you willing to teach boys and go on a winter camping trip with them? I said, it's amazing that you give up a week in January. And he said, oh no, we do a camping trip in the fall too, and one in the winter. And it bonds our boys and our teachers in a way you cannot imagine. And Michael Reichart talks a lot about this in I Can Learn From You. Michael Reichart, psychologist, longtime psychologist at the Haverford School for Boys in Philadelphia, wrote two wonderful books with his colleague Rick Hawley, one called Reaching Boys, Teaching Boys, and another I Can Learn From You. But I Can Learn From You is about boys as relational learners. And if you want to know the way boys think about teachers whom they love and why they disqualify other teachers, it's in that book. And the title is Right On, I Can Learn From You. Why boys like certain teachers and why they reject other teachers. And I read it and I thought, I did that when I was a boy.
Are there a couple of traits that you can cite off the top of your head from Reichert's research on this? Because I'm thinking about the teachers listening to this.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Boys want a teacher to be interested in their outside life, not just their classroom life. They want teachers to have a sense of humor. They want teachers to be effective disciplinarians, but with a quality of mercy, not to get uptight about everything. Now, that's hard for teachers to learn because there are things you must respond to set a limit, and there are other things you can let go, and it's going to die out. And it takes a teacher who likes and appreciates boys. When a teacher goes to war with boys, and I've watched a group of second grade boys go to war with a teacher, I've watched a group of fifth grade boys go to war with a teacher, it's because she and sometimes he overreact to everything, and then they get brittle, and then the boys, then they start to get sadistic.
Yep, the brittle's a good word actually. That's when I'm thinking about those teachers coming in with their students, and they have a brittleness about them.
Yeah.
And again, it's no judgment on the teacher whatsoever. It is a really challenging job to be managing 20 plus, 25 plus
Squirrely
students,
boys,
right? And squirrely boys. And it leads me to my final question. Unfortunately, this is going to have to wrap up soon, but I'm curious about male teachers. And is there anything you can share in terms of your wisdom about is there an importance for boys to see themselves reflected in the classroom? Is there something beneficial about that? Or is it not that simple? Because we're looking at the idea that I think Richard Reed cites.
There is some research that says that during the middle school years, when it's identity formation, when boys are turning away from their moms and thinking, she can't get me to manhood, my dad can if he's around.
Right.
But my coach gets me. My coach gets me. One of the things I love about working at Belmont Hill School is almost all of our teachers are coaches. I mean, it's a really, really high percentage. So they see them all morning in the classroom. They see them in the afternoon in the field. And one of our teachers, now retired, he's an English teacher. He said, many middle school boys who come out of public school have never had a male teacher of any kind.
Right. That's right.
They've never had a male teacher who loved poetry. And they've never had a male teacher who loves poetry and coaches football.
Yes.
Complete package.
Yep.
What it means to be, a whole man.
Yep. Fully human.
Yeah.
Right? I had a great podcast episode with a teacher coach. The whole focus was on what is teaching, what is coaching.
Yeah.
And that same point was made. He's a football coach. He was an award-winning football coach, prize-winning football coach at Sierra Canyon School up in Chatsworth. And he is also a phenomenal history teacher who just brought color and texture to the classroom in a way that was just brilliant. And to be able to see two sides, but not just two sides, but ultimately for boys to see in front of them as adults, they may not want to be teachers, but they definitely want to learn how to navigate the world as an adult through the only adult in the room in front of them.
Right.
And to see the multidimensionality and the fact that people are nuanced, people are paradoxical, people are complicated, people are colorful, to see that echoed through male role models is huge. Is there any last thing you'd like to share as we wind up this conversation?
I don't want to leave the idea that only men can do for boys. I had a dear friend who went on to be a teacher, but he had a summer camp experience, and at the end of it, a woman counselor said to him, I like the man you're going to growing up to be. And I think that's the expression of confidence. You're on the right route, buddy.
You're on the right route, buddy. And that, to leave on that anecdote right there, Michael, is beautiful to me, because it sums up this theme of belief, the theme of hope, the theme of trust, the theme of I like you, right? From adult to child, right? And this idea that I like the you are becoming. This idea of becoming, this pathway ahead of us, boy, girl, however you identify, if you're a young person growing up today, to have an adult say those words to you, I like the person you're becoming.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine a deeper sense of compliment and hope than a statement like that. So that's
well,
beautiful.
It was a story told me by a 45-year-old man about something a counselor had said to him when he was 14.
That sticks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for a conversation that inevitably will no doubt stick with our listeners. And I'm thrilled, Dr. Thompson, Michael, to have you on. And I'm just so thrilled about this conversation. And I'm excited about where we can go from here as a society, really looking at flourishing boys and how to grow them. And with this idea that when boys have the opportunity to focus on themselves and to be better people, girls will benefit as well. As Michael said, it's not a zero-sum game. this is a chance for us to really, coast draft off the success of one and also work on the imminent success of the other. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Michael G. Thompson with us on Reach, Teach, Talk. Real pleasure having you with us today. Thank you.
It was a delight.
You've been listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Damon. If you'd like to recommend a guest for a future episode, you can send your suggestion or questions to nat@reachacademics.com.